Welcome guys, in this video I'll check a rare opening. I'll check the Malinois defense for black, and this goes as follows: d4, c6, c4 from white, and now the slightly surprising b5 from black. So just to mention this quite quickly, if white goes anything else than c4, for example knight f3, which is a very common move, then b5 would not be the greatest move, because there would be no challenge to any pawn on c4, which is the main point of the Malinois, that you want to exchange the b pawn for white's c pawn. So here I would just recommend going possibly d5, maybe even d6, but d5, and get this kind of Slav setup, and continue with, for example, knight f6, bishop f5, depending on white's setup, which should be a very normal game. But in this video we'll take a look at the white's most principal move, c4, and now b5 from black. So as mentioned, we want to exchange the two pawns because this would give us an open b file and increased control over the center. So white has many options. We will continue with probably the most direct and aggressive move, c5, clamping down on the center, at least on this square, which would possibly discourage d6. And of course this pawn looks a bit silly now, but as we will see, there's no direct way white can take advantage. So knight f6 is a good start. Any gambits starting with e5 tends to lead to catastrophe for black in these variations. I would not recommend going for any direct assault with e5. Check it if you'd like, of course, but knight f6 is the healthy and more sound move. Now g3 is probably white's most prudent move, because this diagonal could be, at least it's potentially dangerous for us. We have to break free from this pin, not pin, but control over the center, and of course white can play this to get this pin and towards the rook on a8. This is not a big concern for us in this position. We could take on c5, exchange queens, and suddenly this pawn on c5 would be very weak. So white needs to do something about this. cd6 is probably the best move, and we'll recapture. I'm going to show one setup for black against this. You could go g6 and play it like a king's in the defense, of course, but I will check bishop e7. Now e4 is the most aggressive move, probably the only move we have to really check before playing this. Castles, knight going to e2, of course could go to f3, of course, but that would block the bishop on g2. So it makes more sense to have this on e2, bishop b7, castles, and many moves possible for black here, maybe even c5 as well, breaking up the center, but knight bd7 is okay. This position is quite flexible for black. Might look a bit passive with the bishops locked behind the pawns, but you could break free with c5 at any given moment here. You could play rook e8 to centralize the rook, maybe even a5, queen b6, many options for black. We have to check the very aggressive f4 from white, preparing of course e5, but this also makes his kingside position a bit airy. We can take advantage with queen b6, eyeing this king. Now knight bc3. Of course, knight d2 would allow c5 with a more direct attack from black than what we are usually allowed to do. Knight g4, and white is in huge trouble here with knight f2 and knight e3, both possible moves for black in the next move. So knight bc3 is probably better, but after b4, chasing this knight away, queen b5, and probably c5 will be played in not too long, and this is looking just fine for black. You can even go d5 probably, and black has not much to complain about. The c5 is shouldn't be a big concern for us in the Malinois. Moves like b3, g3, and even d5 could be played. We can check d5. I'm not going to go through every variation in this video of the Malinois. I'll just include a link to the Lee chess study where all the variations are analyzed quite thoroughly. You can check those at your own convenience. d5 is very direct from white. bc4 is nice for us. This is probably one of the main goals of the Malinois, just to get this move in one way or the other, and then we can develop, because now black's center and pawn structure is slightly better than white's, because we have an open b file and 3 pawns controlling the center against white's 2 pawns. So that's a good start for us. e4 could be played. e3 shouldn't worry us too much. We can just take on d5 and develop, and once we get these pawns rolling, this could be very ugly for white. So e4 is necessary to control the center. Is cd5. Of course, shouldn't be afraid of queen takes, because the rook, even though it's threatened for now, knight c6 saves the day, and after bishop takes c4, threatening a mate, of course. e6, and with a subsequent knight f6, this should be quite fine for black, who's behind in development for now, but after the queen moves, let's say all the way back to d1, knight f6, bishop c5, maybe even d5 coming, and this is starting to look quite lively for black. So ed5 is probably better for white to control the c6 square and claim a stake in the center as well. And of course, if white can continue with bishop c4 in the next move, this is probably okay for white, but after the very annoying queen c7, white needs to figure out another way to recapture the pawn on c4. Queen d4 is a move. Knight f6, bishop c4. Of course, queen takes c4 is not possible in this position, because we have the very tricky knight takes d5, and we are taking advantage of this lonesome bishop on c1, unprotected, unguarded for now. So queen d5, queen c1 is possible for us, and we can continue with knight c6, for example, if we want to do that. Even take on b2 if we are super greedy today. So bishop c4 must be played. And now we have several options to take advantage of white's lagging development, but e5 is probably my favorite move. And no matter what white does, for example, d takes and f takes, and black's advantage and initiative will be quite substantial. Queen d3, we will follow with e4, flick in bishop b4 check, and already we can see that white is struggling. So this variation is not a concern for black. Doesn't really challenge the Malinois as a setup, so we have to check something more to the point, probably cb, and now the most aggressive move is e4. We will check this first. So a lot of variations possible here. We should just note that bishop takes b5 is a threat. We are countering this threat with a threat of our own. Bishop takes e4. So if bishop e5, bishop e4, then we have another example of how the Malinois has given us a preferential pawn structure. This is slightly better for black, because we have 2 pawns controlling the center. White has only 1 pawn, and we have open c and b file, which hopefully we can take advantage of at some later stage in the game. So this is a good start for us. We can retreat with our bishop, we can play knight f6, and everything is well, as long as we can include these 2 pawns in the fight for the center, of course. This is very important, and the main point behind the Malinois. So knight d2 is probably a better move, and this is what the top level players play when they face the Malinois defense, which is not very often. Knight f6, bishop d3, and now e6 is probably okay. Remember that even though white could take this pawn at any given moment here, we have a counter threat against the e4 pawn, which is a good exchange for us. Knight f3, now a6. We have to play it sooner rather than later, probably. Better not to waste any time doing something else. So a6 is fine, protecting this one. Castles, bishop e7. And now if white wants to get a really lively and sharp game, white could go e5. Any other move keeps the position pretty even. White has probably a slight advantage in this position because of the space advantage in the center. I mean, these two pawns are quite massive, but for now black's position is quite solid, this is probably one of the main reasons I wanted to take a look at the Malinois today, because it's a very rare opening, but its goal, the positional goal of the Malinois, is to exchange a flank pawn versus a central pawn, and this would of course give us a very good control of the center, and the Malinois is quite difficult to break down. This is a prime example of this. E5 from white, very aggressive, very to the point. Knight d5, knight d4, we of course develop. Please note that white wants to attack on the king side, so we do not want to castle prematurely with black here. Just hold on for now. Don't rush into a short castle here, because that could get really ugly after, for example, knight f g5 and queen to h5, and suddenly we see that white has a lot of pieces attacking our king and we have very few defending it. So we have to keep the king in the center for now. Bishop g5 is a fine move from white. Bishop takes, then knight d6 would be catastrophic for us, and if h6, then again knight d6 is very troublesome and probably game over already, because we lose a piece here on b7. So we play f6, white takes, g takes, bishop h6, stopping any short castle, any movement on the king side. Queen b6, maybe you want to go long with the king to the queen side. That's a very nice and sharp plan. We have to be careful, of course. White could get something going with a4, but for now this is quite solid for white. So the computer probably gives white plus 1 point something here, 1 point, let's say 2-3, which is a quite substantial advantage. But there's no material gain to be had by white here. White can't win any material, so there's no direct win. And black's potential in the center with these 3 pawns, an open g file, and of course the monstrous bishop on b7, all are factors that could prove quite beneficial for black here in the middle game. So at least from a practical point of view, I really like this for black. So these are all of course potential plans, and we have to remember that the bishop on b7 is our cornerstone, and we want to use this to get an attack going on the king side. So this is the reason behind white's rook c1 in the 14th move. The plan is of course knight c5 and to take this bishop on b7. Sadly, there's not much we can do about this. We don't want to play d6. This would weaken our pawn structure, especially the pawn on e6, too much. So this is not possible for us. No, we play rook g8 instead. 2 moves for white here. We have to check them both. Of course, there's plenty of other moves, but there are 2 quite logical moves. Knight g3 to block the g file and maybe to threaten this pawn on h7. No matter, we play f5. And in this position, white could sacrifice a piece on f5, but this would not lead to any win for white. Quite on the contrary, black, after the brilliant knight c to b4, opens up for the queen coming to g6, and also opens up for the bishop on b7, which is a tremendous piece at this moment. And suddenly we see that white is not the one winning or attacking, it's black who's actually going to attack here. So instead of knight g3, probably knight c5 is better. We play f5 anyway. The reason that we are not considering taking on c5 is probably because after dc5, for example, queen c7 and something like, let's say, rook e1, many moves have rook e1, g3, queen d2, we see that this bishop on h6 is just too good. I mean, it's controlling all the dark squares, and this could be a real problem for black. So from a positional point of view, we do not want to exchange this knight on c5. We want to keep this bishop close to our king, and if that means giving up our attacking bishop, then so be it, because we have to keep this one close to our king and to defend the central squares, f6, d6. So f5 is probably better. g3 perhaps to block any rook takes g2 and to increase the defense of the king on g1. Rook g6. The bishop goes back, rook c8, centralizing the rook. And after these moves, and probably rook e1, we see that, okay, white is still better, but we have very nice control of the center with the knight on d5, occupying a tremendous square. Even though our king is slightly airy on e8, we could do something about that immediately. Probably we can play king f8 to get this one to safety, at least away from this x-ray attack. And in this position, I think black has very decent practical chances, even though the computer prefers white. And then I would have no big concern playing this with black in a practical game. So this is definitely something you could check out on your own. And other variations we could check in the Malinois, besides taking an e4 and c5 and d5, of course, is also worth checking something like knight a3, which looks slightly annoying because this is our plan and we will of course use it. You don't want to play b4, that will play into white's hands, because knight c2, this one is attacked and the center will probably overpower us quite a lot in the center, because something like a5, for example, e4, e6, knight f3, and as we can see, this is starting to look quite passive for black. And these two pawns, usually they are quite useful in the Malinois, but at this moment they look a bit out of place. So just follow the recommendation and the main point behind playing the Malinois in the first place. bc4, knight takes. Now e6 is a very nice move, just slowly developing. Knight f6. And after bishop f4 threatening knight d6 check, then we play d5. Knight c2 e5, and I mean, as we can see, white is ahead in development, and this might be a concern for some of you. In this position we have several good moves, for example bishop d6, knight e4, but also the main move that I would like to recommend, queen b6. A multi-purpose move, protecting this pawn on c6, but also threatening the pawn on b2. So knight d3 increases control over c5, but also protects b2. That's very nice. Also a multi-purpose move. But after knight bd7, we see that it will be very difficult for white to stop us from breaking free with c5. The central break would increase our control over the center. It would exchange away a slightly weak or potentially weak pawn on c6, so exchanging this one off against white's central pawn on d4 would be a small triumph for black. And after, for example, rook c1, bishop a6, we see again that the threat of c5 is renewed, and we could even include knight e4. So we can just check, for example, e3, knight e4, bishop e2, and after something like, let's say we even have bishop b4 in this position actually, so let's check this, exchanging the knight away of course, but this would not be worrisome for us at all. And here we can even win a pawn on b2. We can include the g5 move just to torment this one on g3 a bit. So this is not a concern for us. We can win the pawn back on b2 and everything is well. You could also play slightly more conservatively in this position with something like c5, but or even f6. But one thing that you should remember is that the main point of the Malinois is to increase your central control, and by playing c5 we prove just that. And that's by exchanging the b pawn for white's c pawn. This enables us to play c5, and in this position black has no big worries and should be more than fine. So I hope the Malinois was something you would consider in a practical game. Remember that if your opponent played something else than c4, for example, knight f3, then the Malinois b5 move is not really possible, or it's possible, but the whole point of the Malinois is gone, because now white could just refrain from playing c4 and play something else. Also, you have to make sure you're ready for e4 in the second move, and here of course the Caro-Kann move d5 would be my recommendation. So the Malinois could be used in conjunction with Caro-Kann if that's part of your repertoire. So good luck in any practical game, and remember to check out the Lee chess study after this video for more analysis and variations.